Today, we're diving into the core philosophy of one of the all-time investing greats, Peter Lynch. We're pulling from a classic lecture he gave back in 1994, but trust me, this wisdom is as relevant today as it ever was. While running the Fidelity Magellan Fund, the guy delivered an average annual return of 29.2%, just an incredible record. And his main message was surprisingly simple. You, the individual investor, can absolutely do this too. Lynch kicked things off with this really powerful idea. He thought it was a total tragedy that regular people have been fed this story that they can't possibly compete with the big Wall Street institutions, with all their fancy computers and degrees. He was adamant that this just isn't true at all. But he warned, if you act like you have no chance by chasing hot tips and gambling on options, well, you're gonna get exactly the results you expect. The key is to change your approach, because then you can actually use the big guys to your advantage.
So how do you do it? We've broken down Lynch's rulebook into 5 key principles. First, we'll talk about the unique edge you have as an individual investor. Then we'll hit his single most important rule: know what you own. After that, we'll learn how to ignore all the noise out there and avoid some really common psychological traps. And finally, we'll get to why Lynch believed your gut is the most important organ for investing.
All right, first up is a point that might sound a little backward at first. Lynch actually argues that the fact that big institutions dominate the market is what gives you, the small investor, a massive advantage. Okay, so here's the logic. Lynch says that because these big institutions tend to move in herds, they push stock prices to totally irrational extremes, way too high and way too low. This creates massive inefficiencies in the market. So if you've actually done your homework on a company, you can patiently step in and buy a great business when the institutions are all panic selling. Their herd behavior becomes your golden opportunity.
Now we get to what Lynch called the single most important thing for any investor. This is the absolute bedrock of his entire philosophy. If you just get this one thing right, you are already way, way ahead of the game.
And this is his simple test. Look at your own portfolio right now. For each stock you own, could you explain to a child simply and clearly why you own it? If your only answer is, well, the sucker is going up, you're in trouble. Lynch was dead serious about this. If you can't actually articulate the case for a company, you just shouldn't own it. Period.
This is a perfect example of the kind of company he says people love to own, but absolutely shouldn't. It sounds super impressive, right? High-tech, complicated, but you have no earthly idea what's really going on. Lynch said if you own a piece of crap like that, you will never make money. Someone will always come along with something newer and shinier, and you won't have the foggiest idea what just happened to your investment.
And here's the complete opposite. This is a business Lynch could get his head around. He didn't have to worry about low-priced Korean imports or what was happening in recessions. He could literally go into a store and see that people were still buying coffee and donuts. And you know what? He made 10 to 15 times his money on Dunkin' Donuts. The point is so crucial. Invest in what you can actually understand. This really gets to the core of the problem. Lynch thought it was just absurd that people do more research buying a microwave oven than they do before investing their entire life savings. Think about it. You wouldn't buy a refrigerator without checking reviews. So why would you buy a stock based on some random tip? And when people lose money this way, they blame the system. Lynch says, no. Blame the fact that you bought a piece of junk without doing any research. This leads us perfectly to our third principle. So once you know what you own, the next step is knowing what to ignore. There is a whole universe of financial information out there, and according to Lynch, most of it is just useless noise. This is one of my all-time favorite quotes from him. He had absolutely no time for broad economic forecasting. Nobody can predict recessions or interest rates with any kind of consistency. He pointed out, if anyone could predict interest rates correctly just 3 times in a row, they'd be a billionaire. The fact that there are so few of those tells you everything you need to know. So Lynch makes this really crucial distinction. On one side, you have what he calls a waste of time, trying to predict the overall market, where interest rates are going, that sort of thing. On the other side, you have useful facts, real, tangible, industry-specific data. So if you own auto stocks, rising used car prices are a relevant fact. If you're in chemical stocks, a drop in aluminum inventories matters. These are things you can actually use. All right, let's dive into some common psychological traps. Lynch identified several beliefs that, they sound logical on the surface, but they are incredibly dangerous for investors. This is a classic. A stock falls from 100 to 60, and people think it's a bargain just because it's cheaper than it used to be. Lynch tells this great personal story about buying Kaiser Industries.
It had fallen from $26 to $16, and he thought, how much lower can it go? He bought a massive amount. Then it went to 10, then to 6, 5, 4, and finally to 3. The lesson? A stock can always go lower if the company's fundamentals are getting worse.
And here's the follow-up trap. This question sounds so logical, right? The stock is already cheap, so the downside has to be limited. Lynch says this is one of the most destructive ideas in all of investing. Look, if you invest $20,000 in a stock at $50 a share and it goes to zero, you lose $20,000. Simple enough. But if you invest that same $20,000 in a stock at just $3 a share and it goes to zero, you still lose exactly the same amount of money, $20,000. The stock price is irrelevant. The amount you can lose is the amount of money you invest. The final trap is this dangerous belief that good stocks always come back. Lynch just points out that this is not true. RCA never got back to its 1929 high. The world changes, entire industries get disrupted, and some stocks, well, they just never recover. And this brings us to our final section, which covers what is arguably the most important element of all. After all the research is done, Lynch believes success really comes down to one thing: your temperament. The market goes down. It's just a fact of life. But Lynch puts it in perspective with some really simple math. Looking at nearly a century of data, the market has a 10% drop, what we call a correction, about once every 2 years. And it has a 25% or more drop, a bear market, about once every 6 years. See, these aren't freak accidents. They are normal, recurring events. If you're not ready for them, you probably shouldn't own stocks. But if you are, they are fantastic buying opportunities. And this is such a crucial mindset to have during those downturns. It is so easy to get emotionally attached, to feel like the market is personally attacking you. But you have to remember this simple rule. The stock does not know you own it. It doesn't care what you paid for it. All that matters are the fundamentals of the business. You have to stay objective. And this just perfectly sums up the final point. You don't need complex math or a PhD in economics. You just need to be able to add 8 and 8 and get reasonably close to 16. The real key is having the stomach to ride out the volatility and not panic when everyone else is losing their minds. It's about having the conviction in your research to actually buy more when a great company goes on sale. So the question isn't how smart you are, it's how strong is your stomach?